Okay, so we'll share my screen. Hopefully you can see my screen.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so Art provided a really great introduction to what I'm going to talk about this evening and what CDTC does. But New Visions 2050 is our long-range plan for the region. And tonight I'm going to really focus on bicycling and what New Vision says about bicycling and what actions local governments, citizens, the region can take to move bicycling as a viable transportation option forward in the region. So the plan is a blueprint for regional transportation that reflects a shared vision for the region. It's a 30-year plan, and the purpose of it is to guide the prioritization and funding of investments. CDTC programs federal transportation money. So when that money comes to the region and we need to decide how to spend it, we refer to this plan and what, how it suggests we should spend it. And this is all based on regional consensus, on stakeholders discussion, on a really lengthy collaborative process. So Art gave a good explainer of what the Capital District Transportation Committee is, but CDTC is a metropolitan planning organization, and there's about 13 of us in New York State. We are required by federal legislation for metropolitan areas with a population of 50,000 or more. We include the 4 counties minus a little portion of Upper Saratoga County. And we include major transportation organizations and authorities, as well as all 4 counties, all of our cities, and a number of our towns. This plan took quite a bit of time to develop. We started developing it in early 2019. It was written and developed in-house by CDTC staff. A lot of MPOs will contract this out to a consultant, but we do it all in-house. And we collect, we compile, and we discuss what data, transportation data, land use data, population demographics data is telling us. What are the trends? What are larger metropolitan areas seeing and experiencing in the transportation system or in shifting modes and behavior? How does the economy and lifestyle and all that kind of stuff influence transportation? We are constantly compiling feedback we receive through our Linkage program, which I'll talk about later, but we provide funding support to local governments and help them study different locations to see how we can better integrate transportation and land use. And there's a lot of public outreach involved in that. So we're always compiling and tracking what people are saying, what people want, every time we do a study. And then, of course, New Visions always sets performance measures like, how many vehicle miles traveled have occurred in the region, greenhouse gas emissions, crashes, all other performance measures. So we track those and measure those on an ongoing basis. We also had a number of task forces for different subject areas. CDTC has a planning committee and a policy board, and this consists of elected and local officials, transportation stakeholders, our state partners, Federal Highway, and representatives from other towns and villages. Then we opened up the plan to public comment. We actually approved and released the plan March 5th, and the following Friday, our office closed. But we did do continuous public outreach. We just had to shift almost everything virtual, and we tried our best to reach people who do not have access to technology or a dependable device. We tried our best. We got some good feedback. and our policy board adopted the final plan in September, so we are in the implementation phase. So the plan consists of multiple pieces. We have a lot of what we call white papers, or kind of chapters, and it's everything from, you know, the state of infrastructure to the safety and security, complete streets. There's a bicycle and pedestrian chapter, that, and the transit, and these all really dig deep into the details of these different modes and programs. But then there's also a financial plan that looks at how much it will cost the region to maintain the system, to make the improvements it wants, and to meet its goals. How much money do we think we'll have? How much money do we want if to do, so we could do everything? And a number of other documents. The document that I recommend people take a look at is the executive summary document. So just to give you an idea of what the impact of the long-range plan is, previous long-range plans have recommended or highlighted some key projects in the region that have been implemented, like bus rapid transit, the Albany County Rail Trail, the 787 corridor study, and other really big projects that have had a significant regional impact, like trails, even paving of the Northway, the Erie Boulevard reconstruction, and others. So funding is always kind of a big, it's always a question mark, it's always a stumbling block, it's just this kind of massive thing that we're always dealing with, and CDTC is in charge of programming federal funding. So constructing, maintaining, and operating the public transit system, intermodal facilities, bicycle and pedestrian network, and street and highway system included in New Vision's 2050 will cost an average of $775 million each year between now and 2050. The cost of maintaining the system currently is $454 million each year. And this works out to approximately $530 per person per year. So it's important that we, when we go into this plan, we understand that transportation affects everyone. And in order to achieve our goal of kind of creating and developing this quality region, we need to look at this from a holistic perspective, and how each piece of the system influences each other, and how everyone is impacted. Every transportation choice, every transportation behavior has another impact on another mode or another person. A little snapshot of the region to give you an idea of where we've been, where we're going. We are a very slow growth region. There's very little growth, but we have experienced a lot of development. So we've kind of spread out without really growing in numbers. And this has increased driving in the region. And we have a changing population, changing lifestyles. There's just changing needs and the types of jobs people have, where people are traveling for jobs, and the system needs to be able to adapt to that. Our road and bridge network have a replacement value exceeding $30 billion. And a lot of our major pieces of infrastructure are coming up on their useful life, and we need to start thinking about what we're going to do with them. And even, you know, if you don't drive a car, if you take the bus, ride a bike, or walk, all modes really rely on the foundation of our system, which are roads and bridges. So if you are a bicyclist, if you like bicycling, if you wish you could bicycle, you've probably noticed that it's not easy everywhere, and that we've been a region that has been somewhat slow to really adopt more comprehensive bicycle design and engineering into the system. we have a really extensive and really great trail system, which has increased in size significantly. And we actually expect by the end of next year to be about 150 miles, and that includes the Empire State Trail pieces. And we've also seen bike facilities, the number of miles of bike facilities, excuse me, significantly increase. And we've been successful in building out the sidewalk network. Sorry. So our system moves an incredible number of people and goods. The daily regional VMT is over 22 million. We have a very active airport and port. Currently, multi-unit housing development is outpacing construction of new single-family home houses. Given the economy and changing demands and lifestyles from younger generations, this may not be surprising. We are still seeing 80% of the region commuting by driving alone, and 10% are walking or biking. The electric vehicle charging station network has significantly and rapidly expanded in the region, and we have a real opportunity to shift a lot of trips to electric, which is good news for greenhouse gas emissions. We have seen fatal crash and injury rates trend downward, which, as we see cars being developed to be safer, that should be no surprise, but sadly, we are not seeing crashes for non-motorized, for bicyclists and pedestrians trend downward. And also we have more travel options than we ever had before, with the introduction of some shared services and other things like Uber and Lyft. So like I said, we released this plan in March, and then COVID happened and we had to close our office, and we've seen a lot of other disruption throughout the region to the economy and to the transportation system. And these are all things that we expect to either accelerate some of the things that we point out in New Visions, or completely upend them. So, you know, working from home is a trend that was growing. We expect that to continue to grow post-COVID. How the economy recovers will be interesting. We've seen a lot of streets converted to be open or slowed so that people could social distance, or so that restaurants can operate. A lot of it in the region has been driven by economic development. But what the long-term impact of that is, or if people, you know, want to see that stay even after COVID, we don't know. We've seen some shifts in mode and how people travel. The demand for bikes has increased significantly. If you've tried to get a bike or a bike part from a bike shop, you probably know that it's difficult to get them. The bike rescues during the summer were struggling to keep up with the demand, and we saw traffic really decrease. And then as traffic rebounded, it hasn't been, we haven't seen peak hour travel. It's just kind of been like a continuous flow throughout the day. So we see a real shift in commute versus non-commute trips, which kind of creates opportunities for the transportation system and which trips we can serve. And then, of course, a shift in curb management. So how the curb is managed for parking versus pickup versus, oh, we're going to get rid of parking so we can make a parklet or a restaurant bench. And these are things that we thought what we would see in the future, but are happening now. And then, of course, with COVID travel restrictions, intercity and state travel have been significantly impacted, and we're unsure what the long-term impacts of that are. This is free data. We had access to up through July, where you can see the decrease in VMT in the region of traffic, and then the slow rebound. And it hasn't even quite rebounded to that orange line yet, but again, we're not seeing those peaks in the AM and peaks in the PM. It's more of steady traffic throughout the day. And a recent report from Streetlight, which is who provided the VMT data to us that I just showed, put out a study showing increases in bicycling in metro areas around the country. And the Albany metro area, according to this data, has seen an increase of over 25%. So small metro areas have seen an increase in bicycling, and larger metro areas have seen slight decreases in bicycling over the fall due to COVID and different changes and shifts. We started doing some spot checks of trail use during COVID, and this just kind of gives you an idea. Goldfoot Road on the Zim Smith Trail saw over 150% increase in use, and we thought it must have been a mistake, and we went out and we checked it again, and it was correct. Trails have been really popular. And then Shaker Ridge Country Club, which goes through an office park, with no one in the office, no one was using that trail. So a real shift in the way people are traveling. This is kind of an interesting chart. This obviously 2020 is not finished, and this data is incomplete, but it shows bicycle and pedestrian crashes by month, and it compares 2015 through 2020. And as you can see, as COVID and travel restrictions started impacting travel significantly in mid-March, and you can see what the impact on bicycle and pedestrian crashes have been in our region. So New Visions 2050, the ultimate goal is this term we use, quality region. And what does that mean? It means a high quality of life. It means the ability to access destinations affordably and efficiently. It means a system that's flexible and resilient enough to serve the mobility needs for everyone at any stage of life, in emergencies, in changing circumstances, the freedom to move safely, and equitable distribution of benefits. We asked the public what they thought quality region meant, and this word cloud here is just some examples of keywords that they thought of. And as you can see, walkability, affordable, access, accessibility are all really big themes that people mentioned. So to develop the plan, we use this method called scenario planning. We contemplated 4 potential development scenarios for the region, and scenario planning is a structured way of thinking about an uncertain future by identifying conditions or events that are probable, understanding their likely consequences, and determining how to respond to or benefit from them. So as a region, we must consider the trade-offs and opportunities between competing development scenarios. Which scenario builds a more equitable, vibrant region that supports a quality region? The scenarios we put forward were a status quo, sprawl development, concentrated development, and concentrated development with financial incentives. And when we went to the public, we presented the plan and the different scenarios and what the different scenarios meant, there was largely support for concentrated development and a little bit less for concentrated development with incentives. And a lot of those incentives are fueled by lots of fees for driving. So probably not surprising that there was a little bit less support for that. But generally, people do not like seeing sprawl development, and they definitely don't see what the status quo as the most ideal future. And these were the impacts that we determined would result from each of the different kinds of development. So of course, sprawl development, lower quality land use planning. There would be less walking and bicycling because things would be further apart and harder to access. It would be harder to attract jobs and tourism, less transportation choice, deterioration of character. Whereas concentrated development would help accelerate the development of walkable communities and really, reduce the distance between destinations to make walking and bicycling more feasible, reduce congestion, create more transportation choices, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and just kind of more of that with the concentrated development with financial incentives. So the centerpiece of the New Visions Plan are our planning and investment principles, and these are 15 principles that are directly related to criteria that we use to evaluate proposed projects and prioritize them for funding. And they also influence the types of tasks and initiatives CDTC supports. So in case you can't see these, I'll read these. Invest in a quality region, support economic development, make investments regionally equitable, preserve and manage the transportation system, maintain travel reliability, invest in safety, invest in security, invest in complete streets, encourage bicycle and pedestrian travel, move freight efficiently, invest in transit, provide essential mobility for all, prioritize affordable and convenient travel options, preserve the environment, and leverage technology. So the New Visions Plan kind of explains these in more detail and what each of them means. But basically, our key actions that are in the plan are preserving the existing system, expanding transportation choice, reducing the impact of transportation on the environment and our air quality, and prioritizing environmental justice communities in planning and programming, and identifying vulnerable assets and climate threats. Transportation as a sector is the largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in the region. And there are a lot of incentives and reasons for the region to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. There's the New York State Community Leadership and Community Protection Act that was recently implemented. There are new requirements for electrifying the transportation system and buses. So I think that with other state and federal support, a lot of the goals and New Visions are very feasible. The policies and best practices proposed in New Visions are summarized here: state of good repair, congestion management, complete streets, transit-oriented development, access management, safe systems revision 0, Americans with Disability Act compliance, and good public participation. So what do we mean by a state of good repair? We encourage funding to be prioritized for construction and reconstruction of pavements, bridges, sidewalks, and other existing infrastructure in order to maintain a reliable and structurally sufficient regional transportation system, which is important for all modes. So bike-friendly actions related to this policy, obviously developing maintenance plans for the existing sidewalk system, for bicycle facilities, and for trails. If you use the trail system, especially some of our older trails, you'll see that they're their pavement and asphalt's coming up on a time where they should be repaved. They need some maintenance, some care, and we've surveyed trail ownership and who maintains what, and we've asked if anyone has maintenance plans, and this is really lacking in our region and something we feel is important, as if we're going to continue to expand these facilities, knowing that they will be maintained in the future is really essential. Also, ADA accessibility, making sure that each community has a transition plan and that they're bringing existing facilities into compliance. This bottom right photo, this is here in the region. As you can see, if you were in a mobility assisted device, crossing at that intersection would be very difficult. And focusing investments on the existing system before we really start investing more money in expanding or enhancing the system. and then right sizing and retrofitting. So where is there opportunity to maybe retrofit an existing roadway to accommodate other modes? Manage congestion and not building new capacity. So if you've ever heard the theory induced demand, if you expand a roadway, if you widen a roadway, if you add a lane, you are inviting more traffic. I know it always seems like, well, if this road's really congested, maybe if we added a lane, but once you do that, there'll be more development and the congestion comes back. So the key is managing it and not creating more capacity for more new cars. And bike-friendly actions related to that are, of course, shifting more commute and non-commute trips to bicycle. If we shift more trips to bicycle, there'll be less congestion. Building last mile connections to transit. This is really important and even becoming more important with new shared mobility systems and making it easy for people to, maybe they can't bike for their entire trip, but they can bike from their home to a transit stop. And then, of course, as mentioned before, shared mobility and continuing to expand that. So planning and implementing complete streets. Complete streets is a transportation policy and design approach that requires streets to be planned, designed, operated, and maintained to enable safe, convenient, and comfortable travel and access for users of all ages and abilities, regardless of their mode of transportation. Bike-friendly actions related to this policy, of course, are implementing complete streets at the local level. CDTC has a complete streets workshop program where if a community is interested in either drafting a policy or implementing a policy, we will work with them and work with their government to identify who the people are that need to be coordinating and then develop a system for them to coordinate. We have a Complete Streets Working Group that coordinates with the State Department of Transportation. When the DOT has a list of paving projects on state road, they let us know, we review them, and we let them know, hey, there was this plan we completed in 2016 that recommended a bike lane or recommended adding a sidewalk. Is that something that you can incorporate into this planned project? So really, making sure that there's communication and those opportunities are realized. And of course, identifying opportunities for striping lanes during repaving and maintenance projects, prioritizing connections to existing facilities like trails, and identifying priority corridors and connections. So now looking at the existing system, where are there maybe roads that are wider or have more lanes than they need? Where are there opportunities, kind of, the low-hanging fruit in the system? Encouraging the adoption of safe systems or Vision Zero policies. You may have heard of Vision Zero from areas like New York City that have started to implement this. And this is really kind of the idea that no death or injury is acceptable on the roadway. We need to acknowledge that humans make errors, that we are very vulnerable to injury, that responsibility is shared, and that the goal is to be proactive instead of reactive and not wait for there to be a crash before we do something, but do things systematically. So the impact of safety on bicycling, we actually just got updated data and I wanted to share this. The bicycle related fatal and serious injury crash data, as you can see, it looks like there has been a slight decrease, but this, as a region, we don't feel is good enough. It is, I would say, mostly flat, and there's a lot of room for improvement there. And this is a map of where the crashes have occurred. So it kind of, in the map on the left, it kind of looks pretty random, like it's everywhere. But if you look on the right, if we really zoom in on like the urban core, you can see some corridors that seem to have more crashes than others. And those are places where, we would like to concentrate on or look at alternatives. Also looking at who is getting into crashes and something, I'm a mom, I have a son. So, what's concerning is who is most impacted, and young males seem to be the most vulnerable and those that are getting into the most crashes. So is this an opportunity for us to do more education in schools and through recreational programs? How do we reach people to make sure that they are being safe, and how do we make drivers understand what's going on and what their responsibility is? So bike-friendly actions to create safer streets. So we used to have the 3 E's, and then they expanded to the 4 E's: education, enforcement, engineering, and encouragement. And in transportation, there have been another 3 E's that have become more mainstream and kind of take a different approach to bicycle and pedestrian safety. And that's empathy, ethics, and equity. And making sure that as we build and design roadways, that we aren't just saying words like shared responsibility, that says a driver and a bicyclist have the equal amount of responsibility, because we know that one is very much more vulnerable than the other, and that there are often other inequities between them, like income, and other factors that we need to think about, and we need to protect more vulnerable road users like bicyclists and pedestrians. And then within those groups, younger, older, and people who might be experiencing a mobility impairment or disability. So encouraging smart land use planning, smart growth, and transit-oriented development are major policy recommendations in new visions. Encouraging new development and redevelopment that supports transit and encourages walking and bicycling, which this generally means mixing land uses and increasing density. And sometimes this is hard to sell in the region, but this is really key to being able to support more transportation choices and to make transportation more efficient and more affordable. And bike-friendly actions related to smart growth are bicycle parking. We have seen an increase in bicycle parking, but providing more secure parking and frequent parking is really important, including bicycle facility requirements in site design in the planning process, encouraging development in and around corridors with good bike infrastructure, dedicating parking space for e-mobility. So as we see e-bikes and e-scooters and these other vehicles, being able to dedicate space for them so that they don't become a hazard or conflict with other users, and promoting and cultivating safe bicycling culture. So enforcing traffic laws, making sure that drivers, are yielding to pedestrians, are not driving aggressively, and if they are, that they're ticketed, that they understand that speeding will be also enforced, and that it makes other people less safe. And then communicating bike safety etiquette and messages to the public within the built infrastructure and in other ways through education. So how did the Capital Region respond to New Visions 2050 and these policies, and what their perception of a quality region? We got a lot of really positive feedback. There was consensus support for all of the policies. And as you can see in the word cloud, these are the key words that people, I'm sorry, these are the words that people said they liked about living in the Capital Region, why people liked living here. So proximity to nature and the outdoors was a very popular thing that kept on coming up, and I found that interesting. I do think that the region has a good recreational assets and amenities, and that is definitely very popular. But again, walkability and cities and people also kept coming up. So we had asked people to envision a few different, we created these scenarios where there was a fictional person and place and neighborhood, and we described it and we asked people what they liked about it. So in this one, our person was named Dwayne, and he moves to the region and he's working at a hospital, but he wants to bike to work or drive his electric vehicle, and he wants to be able to walk to restaurants. So we described that, and then we asked the public, what do you like about this vision? And as you can see, so they really like the idea of bicycle paths, bike lanes, and other infrastructure, sidewalks, and safe pedestrian crossings, and transportation choices. Those are the top 3 things that came out of that. And then in another vision, we asked them to envision a retired couple that is looking for affordable housing and maybe get rid of a car. So maybe they want access to good transit, but they still want to be able to take care of their grandkids and visit friends and keep up with their other life. So we explain, their community and what they're looking for, and we asked people what they liked about the scenario. And again, transportation choices was very popular. People really liked the idea of not just relying on their vehicle. So we thought that was interesting. In another scenario, we described a rural scenario where an older couple has a lot of land and maybe like a farm type of setup, and they're getting older and maybe they can't drive to medical appointments or access other types of services that they need. And how can new services and technology kind of close those gaps for them? And we also talk about a nearby trail. And again, people like the idea of having access to transportation services as they age in place and live independently, and access to trails. And then our last scenario was a suburban family that, is pretty typical of a lot of families in the region. They have extracurricular activities, they're running their kids around, they like to travel, they work a lot, and how does the system serve them? And in this scenario, we talked about having real-time traffic information, kind of like the smart technology side of transportation. And people liked that. And of course, easy access to major transportation facilities. But even the idea of no congestion wasn't as popular as those other amenities, which I thought was very interesting. So where are there opportunities to expand bicycling? I think in our region, trails are really are a really important piece of our transportation network. We have a plan, the Capital District Trails Plan, that outlines a strategy for creating a seamless network of trails in the region. And I think that creating this network is very feasible. And I think it's a really good way to introduce people to bicycling. People start on trails, and as they become more comfortable on the bike, they will go out to and start riding on the road. And we really leverage it says Empire State Trail project that is being complete. We saw a significant number of trail miles of that project completed in our region and create some really important connections. So trails is a huge opportunity. Education, I think that we need to connect with people, vulnerable users, but also drivers, to really cultivate the safety culture that we need here to encourage bicycling more. Of course, planning, shared mobility systems. CDPHP Cycle has been very successful in our region. We're seeing more and more trips there, but also electric assist bikes and the recent New York State legislation that has allowed for them. I think that we are seeing a lot of private use of them, but we may soon start seeing them in shared systems, and this really expands mobility for a lot of people. It, you know, takes away basically topography. Hills don't really matter. And we've seen people who might have some mobility disability that makes riding a regular bike more difficult. They have access to e-bikes, and other people who sometimes feel like they can no longer ride a bike have really gained access again to bicycling with e-bikes. Of course, funding is important in order to expand bicycling in the region. And then road diets. There have been quite a few successful examples of road diets, and there are a lot more opportunities in the region for this. So Capital District trails, like I mentioned, they are, and this is before COVID, but they have become increasingly popular, and we are seeing crowding on trails. So thinking about how we continue to make connections, or even looking at existing trails and can we widen them? Can we designate space on the trail for different modes, bicyclists, e-bikes, pedestrians, so that we can reduce conflicts and maintain their safety and attractiveness for everyone. These 4 pictures are all trail facilities that have been constructed just within the last few years. So trails are very popular in the region. We've had a lot of success in building them. The Capital District Trails Plan recommends an additional 200 miles of trails, which has the potential to remove over 17,000 cars. We modeled this proposed system and to see, you know, if we looked at all trips that are 5 miles or less, and you know, who could potentially use a trail for a commute trip. So that number obviously is just an estimate. We have seen that non-commute trips, things like grocery shopping or going to restaurants, meeting up with friends, and going to farmers markets, the trails have been very popular for those kinds of trips. And it's important to mention that trails have a huge role in economic development and creating economic activity in the region. And one project that is currently in its infancy, but part of implementation of the Capital District Trails Plan is CDTC has budgeted funds to study the feasibility of one trail every year. So this is the first year that we are doing this, and we chose the Patroon Creek Greenway feasibility study. And this is an 8.8 mile connection between the Albany waterfront and 6 Mile Waterworks near the Pine Bush Preserve. And if you're familiar with this connection, again, this is an east-west connection, which there are not a lot of good east-west connections in the region for bicyclists. And it connects and runs adjacent to a number of neighborhoods, commercial, industrial, a lot of institutional land uses, UAlbany, nanotech, and then of course recreational destinations like the 6 Mile Waterworks Park and the Pine Bush. We've budgeted $100,000 for consultant services to do this, and it will kick off early next year. Again, shared mobility. So CDPHP cycle got a late start on this year because of COVID, but it was very, very popular. They saw the number of their members increase and the number of trips are growing. They extended the season a couple weeks, and we should have the final data pretty soon. But as you can see, it has been very successful. More cities and towns are interested in more stations and even expanding to areas where it doesn't currently exist. One thing that we will be studying and testing next year is the idea of mobility hubs. So, you know, looking at locations that can serve as a place where transit and bike share and other services like taxi or Uber Lyft or car sharing can kind of all be together and someone can access them more easily, and what the potential for them in the region is. CDTC has a traffic safety ambassador grant program, and we're actually getting ready to release a solicitation for next year's grants, where we make $25,000 available. It's not a lot of money, which is why these are nicknamed the mini grants. They provide a maximum of $5,000 in funding support to nonprofits and local governments and first responders to do bicycle and pedestrian safety projects. The types of projects that are eligible, I mean, it's pretty broad, but we've seen a lot of these demonstration or pop-up projects, and these have been really exciting to see because we think that they result in more permanent projects quicker than just a regular planning study. So we've seen bike lanes painted, and we've seen road diets painted, we've seen pedestrian bulb outs painted, but we've also seen safety training, skills training, we've seen bike rodeos for kids, helmet fittings, a real variety of projects that have both provided safety education, but also kind of created like this encouragement and excitement around bicycles. CDTC's Transportation and Community Linkage program has been in existence since 2001. We've funded 92 projects since then. We budget $175,000 in federal planning funds to support this program. And we, local governments can apply, and we pick projects that range anywhere from a feasibility study for a road diet to bicycle and pedestrian master plan, to zoning and design guidelines, to corridor studies. It did receive a National Planning Excellence Award. This is really one of our, I guess you can say it is our largest planning assistance program. And as you can see from the map, those are all of the communities and locations where plans exist. Obviously, in our large towns and cities, they have multiple plans, maybe a hamlet plan and a corridor plan and a bicycle and pedestrian master plan. But anyone in the CDTC area is eligible. There is an application out now, and it's due December 15th for the 2021 studies, but we do this every year. So if your town, city, or village doesn't get it in this year, there will be another opportunity in 2022. So like I said earlier, road diets are a big opportunity to carve out designated space for bicycling in the region. We've seen several road diets implemented just in the last few years, and there are more planned. So even some are surprising, like the Van Rensselaer Boulevard in Menands. This is a pretty higher speed road, and DOT actually went in when they repaved and they decided to create a buffered bike lane and reduce the number of lanes and reduce the speed limit. So, you know, it's still a higher speed road, but there's a lot of space designated and available to bicycles. Route 32 in Waterville, this was actually a pilot of the road diet. They've since actually installed a cycle track, but this is just an example of what a community can do if they are interested in the idea of a road diet, but maybe not quite sure if there's support or how feasible it is. So this just used temporary paint to set up a section for a few weeks to test it out. And Albany implemented the Madison Avenue Road Diet just a couple years ago. They completed this, converted four lanes. There was 2 in each direction to 1 lane in each direction, a center turn lane, and bike lanes. And we're seeing, you know, we have built some roads with excess capacity, and identifying, you know, where these roads exist. There's a threshold for how many vehicles per day a road can handle. So if a roadway has less than Now, it's different for every road, but generally if it has less than 22,000 vehicles a day, it's a good candidate to look at and study. Maybe we can take some of this pavement and allocate it to different modes and different users. Funding. So we can't build bike lanes, we can't build trails, we can't maintain these systems without money. CDTC is one of the only MPOs in New York State that started carving out money just for bicycle and pedestrian projects pretty early on. Our first set aside was only $226,000. And it was meant for like crosswalks, stop signs, and we had called it the Spot Improvement Program. So it really was looking at a spot and how you can make an improvement of it for bicycles and pedestrians. And over the years, we have increased it. And then, as you can see in our most recent tip that was completed in 2019, we were able to program over $6.5 million for just bicycle and pedestrian projects. So these are just sidewalks, just bike lanes, just trails. These aren't necessarily like complete street projects or reconstruction projects that might also include bicycle and pedestrian elements. So if you included those, it would be even greater. So at CDTC, we're really proud of ourselves for being able to get the support from our members to do this, to increase the funding for bicycle and pedestrian projects. Because like Art said, in New York State, bicycle and pedestrian funding is about 1% of the program, but 6% doesn't sound like a lot. And you're right, it's not a lot, it should be more. But we have worked slowly over the years to increase this. So what's next for New Visions? We're currently doing, everything's virtual. We're doing virtual board training. So if your town board, your zoning board, your planning board, or other community group is interested in New Visions or how they can play a role in implementing it, please let me know and I'd be happy to set up a virtual training. We also have a New Visions virtual learning series. These are webinars and there are actually AICP credits available to planners. So we're hoping to encourage more local government planners to participate, but they are open to everyone. Our next one is December 15th and it will be on freight and e-commerce. So how has everyone shopping online affected our transportation system and how do we see it affecting it long-term and how that might also impact land use in the region. And then January 19th, we have mobility management, which is basically everything but driving in your car by yourself. So bus, car share, carpooling, work from home, how all these different mobility services and strategies can impact the transportation system and help us achieve our New Visions goals. We also recently released a draft public participation plan. So part of New Visions is, one of our goals is increasing the amount of outreach that we do in the public and interacting with the public. So we've drafted a new public participation plan that outlines pretty innovative strategies for how we hope to engage with the public on an ongoing basis and on a project basis. So, and also emphasizing the need to look at public participation through an equity lens, making sure that we aren't just saying, well, you always have to come to us, but how can we reach people who traditionally have not been served or traditionally have not been able to come to meetings because, you know, they conflict with a lot of people's jobs, with family life. They may not be accessible. So really putting the onus of that on CDTC and making sure that we are out in the public and talking to people and asking them what they need from the transportation system. So we invite public comment on that plan. Also preparing for the next TIP. So the TIP, the Transportation Improvement Program, is the capital plan for transportation. And with the new long range plan, how will we prioritize and program funds for that TIP? And then, you know, the big uncertainty, who knows in the next few months to a year, will there be a stimulus? And if there is, what will it look like? And how will CDTC manage that? We did manage the stimulus in 2000, the American Reinvestment Recovery Act in 2008 and 9. So if that happens again, what have we learned, or what could we have learned from that? And how can we make sure that any additional federal funds for transportation are spent wisely to help us recover economically and in every other way from COVID and this ongoing pandemic. So if anyone has any questions or ideas that, you know, they'd like us to think about or write down for our next our next long range plan or for public participation, I'd really be happy to hear them.
Okay, Jen, thank you. That was great. You guys can tell it's a good organization because it's got good people like Jen involved in this. We do have a question in the chat box from Tom Carey, who asks, Jen, could you please explain what streets are included or are under the purview of CDTC, state highways, county, local streets, etc.?
So that's a good question. So all streets, you could say, are under our purview. We do provide planning assistance for all types of streets. However, federal funding generally can only be spent on roadways that are federal aid eligible. So, you know, this depends on functional class and locations. So, however, there are like different types of projects that can be funded with federal funds that can be located anywhere. So trails, it can be located anywhere, and you can use federal transportation funds for trail projects. And sidewalks are, you can, if you're building a new sidewalk, you can use federal funds on any type of road. But if you're going to repave a road or reconstruct a road, that roadway must be a federal aid eligible roadway. And we have a map on our website that shows which of those roads are. And as you can probably assume, it's, you know, related to the amount of traffic and population density and those types of things.
Okay, good. One question occurred to me during your talk when you talked about with COVID, there is no longer, you know, peak hours in the morning and the rush is commuting time, and it's kind of even throughout the day. What does that mean? What kind of opportunities would that present?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, we at CDTC would like to watch this a little bit longer term to see what happens, but it does create an opportunity both in like capacity. If it's the same amount of traffic, but it's spread out through the whole day instead of these two peaks, there's a lot of capacity there, more so than was already there, to reallocate. You know, some of these major corridors that are usually pretty congested, like Route 7, Route 9, you know, are there areas now that maybe could be looked at to reallocate some space on it? Also, you know, our system and how we provide services, particularly transit, are all focused on commute trips. So if we can not just look at commute trips at that AM and PM peak, I think that creates more opportunities because non-commute trips are generally shorter distances. So that, you know, generally, increases the opportunity for people to use alternative modes
Right.
to get there.
Okay. And then I've got a few bike-related questions. Earlier in the day, I was looking around your site and I found something called CDTC New Visions Bicycle and Ped Action Plan from 2015. So I'd like to ask, these were a few of your, this was on your wish list, and I don't know whether anything happened with them. But one was to research and establish a program managed by CDTC to leverage dollars by coordinating group purchases for amenities such as bike racks, signage, and materials for pavement markings for ped and bicyclists. Seems like a good idea.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you might be familiar, we were able to do some group purchasing for bike racks and bike helmets recently. However, for the other things, we haven't made a lot of progress on, but those are still things that are on our list to look at, because there are a lot of things that, for example, Troy will come and say, well, we need to do signage on our trails, and we want to use the Capital District Trails logo or the Empire State Trails logo. We can't be the only city or community that needs these, but if I only buy 3, it's going to cost me more than
Right.
if we all buy 100. So, how can helping, since we are a unique region and we have these 4 medium and 4 small cities, and then all of these towns, there's 78 municipalities, how can we, better coordinate these or act as, play a better role in helping communities get what they need more efficiently and cost effectively.
And beyond the cost of signage, I guess, what about uniformity or sign guidelines? I mean, the Empire State Trail has a lot of that for its own trails wherever they are, but when you're off trail or the local roads, are there any plans to make those signs more uniform in design?
Yeah, so we developed a branding and design guide as part of the Capital District Trails plan. So, and it's there, and we're hoping that people use it and install signage in accordance with it, but we're not enforcers. But figuring out how we can encourage or provide some sort of carrot for communities to do that is something we're working on. And another thing is we are currently developing a regional complete streets guide. So kind of taking all of the best design practices from NACDO, from AASHTO, from ITE, all these different engineering groups, and consolidating them to what is appropriate for the capital region context. And then, providing references to, actual design based on a road topology. All of that is going to be in a guide. And, if you've been coming to Bike Ped meetings or interacting with CDTC for a long time, it probably sounds like we've been saying we're doing that for a long time. It's because, again, we are working on it in-house. It's CDTC staff that's developing it, and it is nearing completion. So we hope to have that out soon, and I think that it will be a really useful guide for people.
Okay, that's good. Another question popped up in the chat box, which is that you stated any trails, in quotes, are eligible for federal funds. How about bike lanes, specifically lanes described in the CDTC Trails Plan, for example, the Albany Loop and Console Road? Are those trails because they're in the Trails Plan?
So if they're in the road, I don't think that you can use federal funding. There are all these kind of gray areas, and if, I'd be happy to look at a project proposal and, determine it. But even if CDTC can't fund it through the federal program. If it's in a plan, like if it's in the Capital District Trails plan, that should make that project competitive when the community pursues funding with the state or with other entities that might be providing funding. CDTC isn't the only organization that programs funding. And, as we know, there's the consolidated funding application process that the state does. And there's a number, sometimes there's other federal programs that can support those projects. So having it in the plan is, I'm a planner, so I'm biased, right? But having it in the plan is really important and gives it priority and leverage in getting funding.
Yeah, the consolidated funding application plan, which you just mentioned, one of those on your wish list back in 2015 was recommending funds be carved out of the consolidated funding application specifically for bike and ped infrastructure. That hasn't happened and is much less likely to happen now with the COVID-related budget crunch.
Yeah. I mean, we generally try to now stay away from, there's a lot of other groups that are in a better position to, kind of advocate for that kind of stuff than us. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And was another one was a regional revolving loan fund for bike and ped infrastructure projects. Was that ever discussed? It's all a question of where that initial outlay of money would come from, obviously.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we've discussed it. We haven't made any progress. The new financial or the new funding source question is, alternative sources of revenue, whether there can be, some regions have had success in as ballots passing initiatives for an extra tax to fund transit. But, on a state or national level, whereas if the gas tax is not sufficient to fund the highway trust fund any longer, it hasn't been raised since 1992.
Mm-hmm.
And it's insolvent. So finding an alternative funding source has to happen on the federal level. But if it doesn't happen on the federal level, how can on the state or regional level, what can we do? Is there a user fee or a VMT fee or tax? Those questions are somewhat explored in New Visions 2050, but again, they're just questions. We don't have a solution. We just are we want to open up that discussion and see, where we can play a role or how we can influence that.
With the trails, which are good in the region, as you said, but maintenance is a big problem. And the Corning Preserve in Albany County, there's a big fight and finger pointing, and nobody wants to maintain that damn trail. Is there any likelihood of Andrew Cuomo with this is all part of the Empire plan? The state could come up with the money, but he's much more likely to say, I did this for you. I built some trails. You take care of them.
Yeah, so I don't know if I should have included it in this, but I forgot. The New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation recently released a statewide trails and greenways plan, and it's actually open for public comment right now. But it does kind of, talk about establishing more support to communities for trails. Maintenance is a huge issue. Some of these trails were built through handshake agreements, and now that they're deteriorating, everyone's kind of it wasn't me.
Right.
So, it's not that people don't want to, it's just want to make sure, that there is proper documentation, and I think that all of that stuff is being figured out and being worked on. But making sure that as we move forward, we are thinking about maintenance as we build, instead of kind of building it and assuming that we'll be able to afford to maintain it.
Okay, one final chat question and then we'll wrap it up. The question is, can you repeat which agency has requirements for increased adoption of electric buses, and does that include school buses?
That's a really good question. So New York State passed the Community Leadership and Community Protection Act. I think I got that right, the CLCPA. And it proposes reducing, and I'm going to mess up the numbers, reducing emissions in New York State pretty significantly in a short period of time. And to do that involves electrification of a lot of the transportation system. There hasn't been any, any sort of declaration of or requirement established yet, but we've seen like New York City say that all school buses and transit buses must be electrified by, I think it's 2030. And I think that what we're expecting that we may see that statewide. We know that the transit agencies and bus companies are moving towards that. The technology is still really new. So, making sure that the technology is viable, and particularly on school buses is important. But, a side note to bike stuff, Lion Electric Buses is a school bus company from Quebec, and they actually located a manufacturing facility in Cohoes. So, they're definitely anticipating more demand for electric school buses, and particularly in New York State. So they wanted to be able to say, we're making these in New York State. So that's where you should spend your state money. So we'll see.
Okay, no more questions. So thank you, Jen. That was wonderful. We really appreciate your time tonight. And thank everybody else for coming. Cycle Schenectady's got a Facebook page. Visit us. Nice pictures and some YI ride reports from cyclists and how many miles they put on this year and things like that. So that's it for tonight, and happy holidays to everyone.
Yes.
Good night.
Stay safe.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Art.
Bye, Tom.
Bye.